Hello everybody and welcome to Jev reading stories to you. We are here again and hopefully we've got things working properly this time. It's not looking like my computer's... Oh, I spoke too soon. It's maxing out some of its settings. It seems to do that when I switch to my camera scene, but that's fine. Anyway, so I am Jev. I am in New Zealand and as you might be able to tell from the accent, and I am going to be reading some more chapters from the Wouldbegoods, which is a book by E Nesbit, and it's referred to as being the further adventures of the treasure seekers. And yes, apparently my screen is a little bit zizzy in one corner, which is not a lot I can do. I keep trying to adjust the settings, but obviously I need to do something about my lighting to improve it, so just pretend it's not there. Or shut your eyes and listen to the story, even better. So, I am reading The Wouldbegoods. I am reading chapter 5, and it's called The Waterworks. So I shall carry on. Chapter 5, The Waterworks. This is the story of one of the most far-reaching and influentially naughty things we ever did in our lives. Ooh, how's that for a start? I'm just going to see if I can increase my volume slightly because my microphone is not right in front of me at the moment, but alongside, so it doesn't pick up on any keyboard noise. Well, it will pick up on keyboard noise, but it won't be quite so thumpy. So here we go. I'll carry on. One of the most far-reaching and influentially naughty things we ever did in our lives. We did not mean to do such a deed, and yet we did do it. These things will happen with the best regulated consciences. Oh my goodness, there's a warning for us. The story of this rash and fatal act is intimately involved, which means all mixed up with anyhow, in a private affair of Oswald's, and the one cannot be revealed without the other. Oswald does not particularly want his story to be remembered, but he wishes to tell the truth. And perhaps it is what Father calls a wholesome discipline to lay bare the awful facts. It was like this. I'm just moving my microphone slightly. Sorry about the bangs and the other noises. Hopefully you'll be able to pick me up a little bit better now that it's banging again, slightly closer to me. But perhaps it is what Father calls a wholesome discipline to lay bare the awful facts. It was like this. On Alison Knowles' birthday, we went on the river for a picnic. Before that, we had not known that there was a river so near us. Afterwards, Father said he wished we had been allowed to remain on our pristine ignorance. The anticipation, oh my goodness. Afterwards, Father said he wished we had been allowed to remain in our pristine ignorance, whatever that is, and perhaps the dark hour will dawn when we wished so too, but a truce to vain regrets. It was rather a fine thing in birthdays. The uncle sent a box of toys and sweets, things that were like a vision from another and brighter world. Besides that, Alice had a knife, a pair of shut-up scissors, I'm thinking that means ones that fold, a silk handkerchief, a book. It was the golden age, which is A1, except where it gets mixed up with grown-up nonsense. It's actually a book that did exist. Also a work case lined with pink plush, a boot bag, which no one in their senses would use because it had flowers in wool all over it. It's for storing your boots in when you're travelling, I think, to keep them from getting dirt on other things. And she had a box of chocolates and a musical box that played The Man Who Broke and 2 other tunes, and 2 pairs of kid gloves for church, and a box of writing paper, pink, with Alice on it in gold writing, and an egg-coloured red that said A Bastable in ink on one side. These gifts were the offerings of Oswald, Dora, Dickie, Albert's uncle, Daisy, Mr. Fawkes, our own robber, Noel, H.O., Father, and Denny. Mrs. Pettigrew gave the egg. It was a kindly housekeeper's friendly token. I shall not tell you about the picnic on the river, because the happiest times form but dull reading when they are written down. I will merely state that it was prime. Though happy, the day was uneventful. The only thing exciting enough to write about was in one of the locks, where there was a snake, a viper. It was asleep in a warm, sunny corner of the lock gate, and when the gate was shut, it fell off into the water. Alice and Dora screamed hideously. So did Daisy, but her screams were thinner. The snake swam around and round all the time our boat was in the lock. It swam with 4 inches of itself, the head end, rearing up out of the water exactly like Kaa in the Jungle Book. So we know Kipling is a true author and no rotter. We were careful to keep our hands well inside the boat. A snake's eyes strike terror into the boldest beast. When the lock was full, Father killed the viper with a boat hook. I was sorry for it myself. It was indeed a venomous serpent, but it was the first we had ever seen except at the zoo, and it did swim most awfully well. Directly the snake had been killed, H.O. reached out for its corpse, and the next moment the body of our little brother was seen wriggling conclusively, that's what he writes, conclusively on the boat's edge. I think he means convulsively. Remember, the children have heard big words, but they don't always get them right. This exciting spectacle was not of a lasting nature. He went right in. Father clawed him out. He is very unlucky in water. Being a birthday, but little was said. H.O. was wrapped in everybody's coats and did not take any cold at all, because he often gets sick if he gets uncomfortable, too cold or too wet. This glorious birthday ended with an iced cake and ginger wine and drinking healths. Then we played whatever we liked. There had been rounders during that afternoon. It was a day to be forever marked by memory's brightest what's-its-name. I should not have said anything about the picnic but for one thing. It was the thin edge of the wedge. It was the all-powerful lever that moved but too many events. You see, we were no longer strangers to the river, and that's written all in capitals. And we went there whenever we could, only we had to take the dogs and to promise no bathing without grown-ups, but paddling in backwaters was allowed. I say no more. I have not enumerated Noel's birthday presents because I wish to leave something to the imagination of my young readers. The best authors always do this. If you take the large red catalogue of the Army and Navy stores and just make a list of about 15 of the things you would like best, prices from 2 shillings to 25 shillings, you will get a very good idea of Noel's presents, and it will help you to make up your mind in case you are asked just before your next birthday what you really need. That's like our house. We look through the hunting and outdoors catalogue when it comes in. Some of us do. It's got hunting gear, it's got fishing gear, not so much interest for me. It's got camping and tramping gear, lights and cookers and all sorts. And some of them are really small ones and some of the big fancy ones that you need to have a car to go somewhere with. Because some people's idea of camping includes huge, great fridges and freezers and everything else. Anyway, so we'll carry on. You'll have some idea of what, just before your next birthday, what you really need. One of Noel's birthday presents was a cricket ball. He cannot bowl for nuts, and it was a first-rate ball. So some days after the holiday, Oswald offered to exchange it for a coconut he had won at the fair, and 2 pencils, new, and a brand new notebook. Oswald thought, and he still thinks, that this was a fair exchange, and so did Noel at the time, and he agreed to it, and was quite pleased till the girls said it wasn't fair, and Oswald had the best of it, and then that young beggar Noel wanted the ball back, but Oswald, though not angry, was firm. You said it was a bargain, and you shook hands on it, he said, and he said it quite kindly and calmly. Noel said he didn't care, he wanted his cricket ball back, and the girls said it was a horrid shame. If they had not said that, Oswald might yet have consented to let Noel have the beastly ball. But now, of course, he was not going to. He said, "Oh, yes, I dare say, and then you would be wanting the coconut and things again the next minute." "No, I shouldn't," said Noel. It turned out afterwards he and H.O. had eaten the coconut, which only made it worse. And it made them worse too, which is what the book calls poetic justice. Made them worse. Maybe they got tummy aches, I'm not sure. We'll be finding out, hopefully, what happens. Dora said, "I don't think it was fair." And even Alice said, "Do let him have it back, Oswald." I wished to be just to Alice. She did not know then about the coconut having been secretly wolfed up. We were in the garden. Oswald felt all the feelings of the hero when the opposing forces gathered about him are opposing as hard as ever they can. He knew that he was not unfair, and he did not like to be jawed at just because Noel had eaten the coconut and wanted the ball back. Though Oswald did not know then about the eating of the coconut, but he felt the injustice in his soul all the same. Noel said afterwards he meant to offer Oswald something else to make up for the coconut, but he said nothing about this at the time. "Give it to me, I say," Noel said. And Oswald said, "Shan't." Then Noel called Oswald names, and Oswald did not answer back, but just kept smiling pleasantly and carelessly throwing up the ball and catching it again with an air of studied indifference. Oh boy, that's a bit of a tease. Winding his little brother up. It was Martha's fault that what happened. She is the bulldog, and very stout and heavy. She had just been let loose, and she came bounding along in her clumsy way and climbed up on Oswald, who is beloved by all dumb animals. You know how sagacious they are. Well, Martha knocked the ball out of Oswald's hands, and it fell on the grass, and Noel pounced on it like a hooded falcon on its prey. Although usually hooded falcons don't pounce, it's once the hood is removed. But we won't tell Oswald that. Oswald would scorn to deny that he was not going to stand this, and the next moment the two were rolling over on the grass, and very soon Noel was made to bite the dust. And serve him right, he is old enough to know his own mind, instead of changing it. Then Oswald walked slowly away with the ball, and the others picked Noel up and consoled the beaten. But Dickie would not take either side, and Oswald went up into his own room and lay on his bed and reflected gloomy reflections about unfairness. Presently he thought he would like to see what the others were doing without their knowing that he cared, so he went into the linen room and looked out of its window and saw that they were playing kings and queens, and Noel had the biggest paper crown and the longest stick sceptre, so obviously Noel was the king. Oswald turned away without a word, for it really was sickening. Then suddenly his weary eyes fell upon something they had not before beheld. It was a square trapdoor in the ceiling of the linen room. Oswald never hesitated. He crammed the cricket ball into his pocket and climbed up the shelves and unbolted the trapdoor and shoved it up and pulled himself up through it. Though above all was dark and smelt of spiders, Oswald fearlessly shut the trapdoor down again before he struck a match. He always carries matches. He is a boy fertile in every subtle expedient. Then he saw he was in the wonderful, mysterious place between the ceiling and the roof of the house. The roof is beams and tiles. Slits of light show through the tiles here and there. The ceiling on its other and top side, on the other side of the ceiling, not the bit that you normally see, is made of rough plaster and beams. If you walk on the beams, it is all right. If you walk on the plaster, you go through with your feet. Oswald found this out later, but some fine instinct now taught the young explorer where he ought to tread and where not. It was splendid. He was still very angry with the others, and he was glad he had found out a secret they jolly well didn't know. He walked along a dark, narrow passage. Every now and then crossbeams barred his way, and he had to creep under them. At last a small door loomed before him, with cracks of light under and over. He drew back the rusty bolts and opened it. It opened straight out onto the leads, a flat place between two steep red roofs, with a parapet 2 feet high, back and front, so that no one could see you. It was a place no one could have invented better than, if they had tried, for hiding in. Oh my goodness, he's found a hiding place up on the roof. And I was right when we were reading about the church tower and about the leads. It's the flat piece of roof which is covered with lead to make it waterproof. That's probably why it's called the leads. Oswald spent the whole afternoon there. He happened to have a volume of Percy's anecdotes in his pocket, the one about lawyers as well as a few apples in his pocket. When he read, he fingered the cricket ball, and presently it rolled away, and he thought he would get it by and by. When the tea bell rang, he forgot the ball and went hurriedly down, for apples do not keep the insides from the pangs of hunger. Noel met him on the landing, got red in the face, and said, "It wasn't quite fair about the ball, because H.O. and I had eaten the coconut. You can have it." "I don't want your beastly ball," Oswald said, "only I hate unfairness. However, I don't know where it is just now. When I find it, you shall have it to bowl with as often as you want." "Then you're not waxy?" And Oswald said, "No," and they went in to tea together. So that was all right. There were raisin cakes for tea. Next day we happened to want to go down to the river quite early. I don't know why. This is called fate or destiny. We dropped in at the Rose and Crown for some ginger beer on our way. The landlady is a friend of ours and lets us drink it in her back parlour instead of in the bar, which would be improper for girls. Pubs in that day and age in England, girls were not allowed in the main public bar, but they were allowed in the back parlour, which was a room that was set aside for women to be able to sit in and be allowed to have a drink, because pubs were often used as places on a journey where you could stop and have some lunch or dinner or even stay the night. And so therefore there had to be somewhere that the ladies and the girls could sit and not be in the wrong part of the pub. Anyway, so that's why she would serve them in the back parlour. We found her awfully busy making pies and jellies, and her two sisters were hurrying about with great hams and pairs of chickens and rounds of cold beef and lettuces and pickled salmons and trays of crockery and glasses. "It's for the angling competition," she said. We said, "What's that?" "Why," she said, slicing cucumber like beautiful machinery while she said it, "a lot of anglers come down some particular day and fish one particular bit of river, and the one that catches most fish gets the prize. They're fishing the pen above Stoneham Lock, and they all come here to dinner, and I've got my hands full and a trifle over." We said, "Couldn't we help?" But she said, "Oh no, thank you." "Indeed not. Please, I really am, so I don't know which way to turn. Do run along like dears." I think she's got the idea that it can be a little bit difficult when you've got the children helping. So we ran along like these timid but graceful animals. Dears. Even though she said dear as in sweet thing, D-E-A-R, not the animal. Need I tell the intellectual reader that we went straight off to the pen above Stoneham Lock to see the anglers competing? Angling is the same thing as fishing. I'm not going to try and explain locks to you. If you have never seen a lock, you could never understand, even if I wrote it in words of one syllable and pages long. And if you have, you'll understand without my telling you. It is harder than Euclid if you don't know beforehand, but you might get a grown-up person to explain it to you with books or wooden bricks. I will tell you what a pen is, because that is easy. It is the bit of river between one lock and the next. In some rivers, pens are called reaches, but pen is the proper word. We went along the towing path. It is shady with willows, aspens, elders, oaks, and other trees. Elders and elders are two different types of tree. It's always confused me. And I'm not sure what an elder looks like, but I know what an elder looks like. They have cute little flowers that look like stars. And they also have berries on, clusters of berries. Dark berries. An elderflower is a lovely flavour in drinks in summer, and elderberry is a lovely flavour for drinks in winter. So there you go. Oswald learned that was the trees. On the banks are flowers: yarrow, meadow sweet, willow herb, loose strife, and lady's bedstraw. Oswald learned the names of all these trees and plants on the day of the picnic. The others didn't remember them, but Oswald did. He is a boy of what they call relenting memory. I don't think so. I think he's mixing his words up again. The anglers were sitting here and there on the shady bank among the grass and the different flowers I have named. Some had dogs with them and some umbrellas, and some had only their wives and families. We should have liked to talk to them and ask how they liked their lot and what kinds of fish there were and whether they were nice to eat, but we did not like to. Denny had seen anglers before, and he knew that they liked to be talked to, but though he spoke to them quite like to equals, he did not ask the things we wanted to know. He just asked whether they'd had any luck and what bait they used, and they answered him back politely, "I'm glad I'm not an angler." It is an immovable amusement, and as often as not, no fish to speak of after all. Fishing, that is, angling. Daisy and Dora had stayed at home. Dora's foot was nearly well, but they seemed really to like sitting still. I think Dora likes to have a little girl to order about. Alice would never stand it. When we got to Stoneham Lock, Denny said he should go home and fetch his fishing rod. H.O. went with him. This left 4 of us: Oswald, Alice, Dickie and Noel. We went on down the towing path. The lock shuts up. That sounds as if it was like the lock on a door, but it's very otherwise. Between one pen of the river and the next, the pen where the anglers were was full right up over the roots of the grass and flowers, but the pen below was nearly empty. You can see the poor river's bones, Noel said, and so you could. Stones and mud and dried branches, and here and there, an old kettle or a tin pail with no bottom to it that some bargee had chucked in. From walking so much along the river, we knew many of the bargees. Bargees are the captains and crews of the large barges, it doesn't even say large, big barges, that are pulled up and down the river by slow horses. The horses do not swim. They walk on the towing path with a rope tied to them and the other end to the barge so that it gets pulled along. That's 1 horsepower. The bargees we knew were a good friendly sort and used to let us go all over the barges when they were in a good temper. They were not at all the sort of bullying, cowardly fiends of human form that the young hero at Oxford fights a crowd of single-handed in books. The river does not smell nice when its bones are showing, but we went along down because Oswald wanted to get some cobbler's wax in Falding village for a bird net he was making. But just above Falding Lock, where the river is narrow and straight, we saw a sad and gloomy sight, a big barge sitting flat on the mud because there was not enough water to float her. There was no one on board, but we knew by a red flannel waistcoat that was spread out to dry on top that the barge belonged to friends of ours. Then Alice said, "They've gone to find the man who turns on the water to fill the pen. I dare say they won't find him. He's gone to his dinner, I shouldn't wonder. What a lovely surprise it would be if they came back to find their barge floating high and dry on a lot of water. Do let's do it. It's a long time since any of us did a kind action deserving of being put in the book of golden deeds." Oh dear. I can see it happening. I'm sorry, I need to take a drink. My throat's getting dry and tickly. I'm just going to read out Lemon's comment in the chat because when I put this on YouTube, you won't see the chat. But Lemon says, "I remember back in the early 90s, back in the UK, we'd get dirty looks if Mum and Da sat in the back pub area. Mum and me were supposed to be in the front parlour. The bar was for Da. Yeah, it depends on the arrangement of the actual pub as to whereabouts those 2 parts are, but there is one part that's for the ladies and one part that's for the men." I can imagine that. Yes, it was always considered in New Zealand that pubs were not really for ladies. Yeah, funny that. Well, probably because the men can get a bit rough when they've had a bit too much to drink. That might be the reason why. Sorry, yes, I'm bumping my desk. I shall carry on. "It's a long time since any of us did a kind action deserving of being put in the book of golden deeds. We had given that name to the minute book of that beastly society of the Wouldbegoods. Then you could think of the book if you wanted to without remembering the society. I always tried to forget both of them." Oswald said, But how? You don't know how. This is about letting water into the pen. And if you did, we haven't got a crowbar. I cannot help telling you that locks are opened with crowbars. You push and push till a thing goes up and the water runs through. It is rather like the little sliding door and the big door of a hen house. I know where the crowbar is, Alice said. Dickie and I were down here yesterday when you were she was going to say sulking. I know, but she remembered manners ere too late, so Oswald bears her no malice. She went on yesterday when you were upstairs, and we saw the water tender opening the lock, and the weir sluices. It's quite easy, isn't it, Dickie? As easy as kiss your hand, said Dickie, and what's more, I know where he keeps the other thing he opens the sluices with. I votes we do. Oh dear, as Lemon says about the pub. Not for ladies and definitely not for kids. That's the main bar that she's referring to. Anyway, I votes we do, which is about the pen, letting water into the pen so the boat can float, the barge can float. Do let's if we can, Noel said, and the bargees will bless the names of their unknown benefactors. They might make a song about us and sing it on winter nights as they pass round the wassail bowl in front of the cabin fire. Noel wanted to very much, but I don't think it was altogether for generousness, but because he wanted to see how the sluices opened. Yet perhaps I do but wrong the boy. We sat and looked at the barge a bit longer, and then Oswald said, well, he didn't mind going back to the lock and having a look at the crowbars. You see, Oswald did not propose this. He did not even care very much about it when Alice suggested it. But when we got to Stoneham Lock and Dickie dragged the 2 heavy crowbars from among the elder bushes behind a fallen tree and began to pound away at the sluice of the lock, Oswald felt it would not be manly to stand idly apart. So he took his turn. It was very hard work, but we opened the lock sluices and we did not drop the crowbar into the lock either. And as I have heard of being done by older and sillier people, it wouldn't be hard to drop them in because they are really quite heavy bars that they use. The water poured through the sluices all green and solid as if it had been cut with a knife, and where it fell on the water underneath, the white foam spread like a moving counterpane. When we had finished the lock, we did the weir, which is wheels and chains, and the water pours through over the stones in a magnificent waterfall and sweeps out all round the weir pool. The sight of the foaming waterfalls was quite enough reward for our heavy labours, even without the thought of the unspeakable gratitude that the bargees would feel to us when they got back to their barge and found her no longer a stick in the mud, but bounding on the free bosom of the river. When we had opened all the sluices, we gazed a while on the beauties of nature. Then we went home because we thought it would be more truly noble and good not to wait to be thanked for our kind and devoted action. And besides, it was nearly dinner time, and Oswald thought it was going to rain. On the way home, we agreed not to tell the others because it would be like boasting of our good acts. They will know all about it, Noel said, when they hear us being blessed by the grateful bargees, and the tale of the unknown helpers is being told by every village fireside, and then they can write it in the Golden Deed book. So we went home. Denny and H.O. had thought better of it, and they were fishing in the moat. They did not catch anything. Oswald is very weather-wise, at least so I have heard it said, and he had thought there would be rain. There was. It came on while we were at dinner, a great, strong, thundering rain, coming down in sheets, the first rain we had had since we came to Moat House. We went to bed as usual. No presentiment of the coming awfulness clouded our young mirth. I remember Dickie and Oswald had a wrestling match, and Oswald won. In the middle of the night, Oswald was awakened by a hand on his face. It was a wet hand, and very cold. Oswald hit out, of course, but a voice said in a hoarse, hollow whisper, "Don't be a young ass. Have you got any matches? My bed's full of water. It's pouring down from the ceiling." Oswald's first thoughts were that perhaps by opening those sluices we had flooded some secret passage which communicated with the top of Moat House, but when he was properly awake he saw that this could not be, on account of the river being so low. He had matches. He is, as I said before, a boy full of resources. He struck one and lit a candle, and Dicky, for it was indeed he, gazed with Oswald at the amazing spectacle. Our bedroom floor was all wet in patches. Dicky's bed stood in a pond, and from the ceiling water was dripping in rich profusion at a dozen different places. There was a great wet patch in the ceiling, and that was blue instead of white, like the dry part, and the water dripped from different parts of it. In a moment, Oswald was quite unmanned. "Crikey," he said in a heartbroken tone, and remained an instant plunged in thought. "What on earth are we to do?" Dicky said. And really, for a short time, even Oswald did not know. It was a blood-curdling event, a regular facer. Albert's uncle had gone to London that day to stay till the next, yet something must be done. The first thing was to rouse the unconscious others from their deep sleep, because the water was beginning to drip onto their beds, and though as yet they knew it not, there was quite a pool on Noel's bed, just in the hollow behind where his knees were doubled up, and one of H.O.'s boots was full of water that surged wildly out when Oswald happened to kick it over. We woke them, a difficult task, but we did not shrink from it. Probably wanted to wake the others up for some time in other occasions. Then we said, "Get up, there is a flood. Wake up or you will be drowned in your beds, and it's 2:30 by Oswald's watch." They awoke slowly and very stupidly. H.O. was the slowest and stupidest. The water poured faster and faster from the ceiling. We looked at each other and turned pale, and Noel said, "Hadn't we better call Mrs. Pettigrew?" But Oswald simply couldn't consent to this. He did not get rid of the feeling that this was our fault somehow, for meddling with the river. Though, of course, the clear star of reason told him it could not possibly be the case. We all devoted ourselves heart and soul to the work before us. We put the bath under the worst and wettest place. The bath would be a tin bath, a round thing, an oval thing that you carried to where you needed it, which is why they could put it where the worst of it was, not plumbed in place. And the jugs and basins under the lesser streams, and we moved the beds away to the dry end of the room. Ours is a long attic that runs right across the house, but the water kept coming in worse and worse. Our nightshirts were wet through, so we got into our other shirts and knickerbockers, but preserved bareness in our feet. And the floor kept on being 1/2 inch deep in water, however much we mopped it. We emptied the basins out of the window as fast as they filled, and we bailed the bath with a jug without pausing to complain how hard the work was. All the same, it was more exciting than you can think. But in Oswald's dauntless breast he began to see that they would have to call Mrs. Pettigrew. A new waterfall broke out between the fire grate and the mantelpiece, and spread in devastating floods. Oswald is full of ingenious devices. I think I have said this before, but it is quite true, and perhaps even truer this time than it was last time I said it, because this is Oswald speaking. He got a board out of the box room next door and rested one end in the chink between the fireplace and the mantelpiece, and laid the other end on the back of a chair. Then we stuffed the rest of the chink with our nightgowns and laid a towel along the plank, and behold, a noble stream poured over the end of the board right into the bath we put there ready. It was like Niagara, only not so round in shape. The first lot of water that came down the chimney was very dirty. The wind whistled outside. Noel said, "If its pipes burst and not the rain, it will be nice for the water rates," because you've got to pay for the water, so you're going to be paying a lot. Perhaps it was only natural after this for Denny to begin with his everlasting poetry. He stopped mopping up the water to say, "By this the storm grew loud apace, the water rats were shrieking, and in the howl of heaven each face grew black as they were speaking." Our faces were black and our hands too, but we did not take any notice. We only told him not to gas, but to go on mopping, and he did. And we all did, but more and more water came pouring down. You would not believe so much could come off one roof. When at last it was agreed that Mrs. Pettigrew must be awakened at all hazards, we went and woke Alice to do the fatal errand. When she came back, Mrs. Pettigrew in a nightcap and red flannel petticoat, we held our breath. But Mrs. Pettigrew did not even say, "What on earth have you children been up to now?" as Oswald had feared. She simply sat down on my bed and said, "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear," ever so many times. Then Denny said, "I once saw holes in a cottage roof. The man told me it was done when the water came through the thatch. He said if the water lies all about on top of the ceiling, it breaks it down, but if you make the holes, the water will only come through the holes and you can put pails under the holes to catch it." So we made 9 holes in the ceiling with the poker and put pails, baths and tubs under, and now there was not so much water on the floor, but we had to keep on working hard, and Mrs. Pettigrew and Alice worked the same. About 5 in the morning the rain stopped. About 7 the water did not come in so fast, and presently it only dripped slowly. Our task was done. This was the only time I was ever up all night. I wish it happened oftener. We did not go back to bed then, but dressed and went down. We all went to sleep in the afternoon, though, quite without meaning to. Oswald went up on the roof before breakfast to see if he could find the hole where the rain had come in. He did not find any hole, but he found the cricket ball jammed in the top of a gutter pipe, which he afterwards knew ran down inside the wall of the house and ran into the moat below. It seems a silly dodge, but so it was. So the ball he didn't pick up was the cause of the flooding. Oh dear. When the men went up after breakfast to see what had caused the flood, they said there must have been a good half-foot of water on the leads the night before for it to have risen high enough to go above the edge of the lead. And of course, when it got above the lead, there was nothing to stop it running down under it and soaking through the ceiling. The parapet and the roofs kept it from tumbling off down the sides of the house in a natural way. They said there must have been some obstruction in the pipe which ran down into the house, but whatever it was, the water had washed it away, for they put wires down and the pipe was quite clear. While we were being told this, Oswald's trembling fingers felt at the wet cricket ball in his pocket, and he knew, but he could not tell. He heard them wondering and what the obstruction could have been, and all the time he had the obstruction in his pocket and never said a single word. I do not seek to defend him, but it really was an awful thing to have been the cause of, and Mrs. Pettigrew is but harsh and hasty, but this, as Oswald knows too well, is no excuse for his silent conduct. That night at tea, Albert's uncle was rather silent too. At last he looked upon us with a glance full of intelligence and said, "There was a queer thing happened yesterday. You know that there was an angling competition. The pen was kept full on purpose. Some mischievous busybody went out and opened the sluices and let all the water out. The anglers' holiday was spoiled." "No, the rain wouldn't have spoiled it anyhow, Alice. Anglers like rain. The Rose and Crown dinner was half of it wasted because the anglers were so furious that a lot of them took the next train to town. And this was the worst of all. A barge that was on the mud in the pen below was lifted and jammed across the river, and the water tilted her over, and her cargo is on the river bottom. It was coals." During this speech there were 4 of us who knew not where to turn our agitated glances. Some of us tried bread and butter, but it seemed dry and difficult, and those who tried tea choked and spluttered and were sorry they had not let it alone. When the speech stopped, Alice said, "It was us." And with deepest feelings she and the rest of us told all about it. Oswald did not say much. He was turning the obstruction round and round in his pocket, and wishing with all his sentiments that he had owned up like a man, when Albert's uncle asked him before tea to tell him all about what had happened during the night. When they had told all, Albert's uncle told us 4 still more plainly and exactly what we had done and how much pleasure we had spoiled. and how much of my father's money we had wasted, because he would have to pay for the coals being got up from the bottom of the river, if they could be, and if not, for the price of the coals. And we saw it all. And when he had done, Alice burst out crying over her plate and said, "It's no use. We have tried to be good since we've been down here. You don't know how we've tried, and it's all no use. I believe we are the wickedest children in the whole world. I wish we were all dead." This was a dreadful thing to say, and of course the rest of us were all very shocked. But Oswald could not help looking at Albert's uncle to see how he would take it. He said very gravely, "My dear Kitty, you ought to be sorry, and I wish you to be sorry for what you've done, and you will be punished for it." We were. Our pocket money was stopped, and we were forbidden to go near the river, besides impositions miles long. "But," he went on, "you mustn't give up trying to be good. You are extremely naughty and tiresome, as you know very well." Alice, Dickie, and Noel began to cry about this time. "But you are not the wickedest children in the world by any means." Then he stood up and straightened his collar and put his hands in his pockets. "You're very unhappy now," he said, "and you deserve to be, but I will say one thing to you." Then he said a thing which Oswald at least will never forget, though but little he deserved it, with the obstruction in his pocket, unowned up to at that time. He said, "I have known you all for 4 years, and you know as well as I do how many scrapes I've seen you in and out of, but I've never known one of you to tell a lie, and I've never known one of you do a mean or dishonourable action, and when you have done wrong you are always sorry. Now this is something to stand firm on. You'll learn to be good in the other ways some day." He took his hands out of his pockets, and his face looked different, so that 3 of the 4 guilty creatures knew he was no longer adamant, and they threw themselves into his arms. Dora, Denny, Daisy, and H.O. of course were not in it, and I think they thanked their stars. Oswald did not embrace Albert's uncle. He stood there and made up his mind he would go for a soldier. He gave the wet ball one last squeeze, and took his hand out of his pocket, and said a few words before going to enlist. He said, "The others may deserve what you say. I hope they do, I'm sure, but I don't, because it was my rotten cricket ball that stopped up the pipe and caused the midnight flood in our bedroom, and I knew it quite early this morning, and I didn't own up." Oswald stood there, covered with shame, and he could feel the hateful cricket ball heavy and cold against the top of his leg through the pocket. Albert's uncle said, and his voice made Oswald hot all over, but not with shame, he said, "I shall not tell you what he said. It is no one's business but Oswald's. Only I will own it made Oswald not quite so anxious to run away for a soldier as he had been before. The owning up was the hardest thing I ever did. They did put that in the Book of Golden Deeds, though it was not a kind or generous act, and did no good to anyone or anything except Oswald's own inside feelings. I must say I think they might have let it alone. Oswald would rather forget it, especially as Dickie wrote it in and put this: Oswald acted a lie which he knows is as bad as telling one, but he owned up when he needn't have, and this condones his sin. I think he was a thorough brick to do it." Condones, not correct usage. Alice scratched this out afterwards and wrote the record of the incident in more flattering terms, but Dickie had used father's ink and she used Mrs. Pettigrew's, so anyone can read his underneath the scratching outs. The others were awfully friendly to Oswald to show they agreed with Albert's uncle in thinking I deserved as much share as anyone in any praise there might be going. It was Dora who said, "It all came from my quarrelling with Noel about the rotten cricket ball," but Alice, gently yet firmly, made her shut up. I let Noel have the ball. It had been thoroughly soaked, but it dried all right. But it could never be the same to me after what it had done and what I had done. I hope you will try to agree with Albert's uncle and not think foul scorn of Oswald because of this story. Perhaps you have done things nearly as bad yourself sometimes. If you have, you will know how owning up soothes the savage breast and alleviates the gnawings of remorse. If you have never done naughty acts, I expect it is only because you have never had the sense to think of anything. And that's the end of that chapter, and I am going to have a drink of water. Did you bring your water or something to drink? And a snack, maybe. I haven't got a snack today. Anyway, I need a drink of water because they're long chapters and my throat does get a little bit dry. So how have you been? What have you been up to? Because I'm in the Auckland region, we're still in level 4 lockdown, and I think we've got one more week to go. I'm not sure. So we'll see. I can look online afterwards, but I'm not going to bother for now. It does all feel slightly familiar because that's how I started my reading in the first place. I started reading during our first lockdown in New Zealand. I started reading the Millie Molly Mandy stories here on Twitch, and then I saved them and put them over on YouTube. And I used just my phone. I put my phone on a little wee tripod, which I have here somewhere, and I don't need to wave it at you because you don't need to see it right at the moment. And that's what I did. And it was the simplest, easiest way to stream something. I just used my phone. I had it connected through Wi-Fi to the internet, and connected with my Twitch account, because you put a Twitch app on your phone, and I just read the story. And I used different places in our house for each time I read a story, because the Millie Molly Mandy stories, there are several books, and each chapter of the book is a complete story in itself, unlike these books, which are for older children. So I got into the habit of reading these stories every day during lockdown in New Zealand. I can't remember if I read during the weekends, but I read during the week. And each of them was anywhere between 6 minutes and 15 minutes long, so really, really, really short compared with these ones. But for reading, this is plenty long enough. When I do a couple of chapters of this, or more chapters if it's a book that's got shorter chapters. And then a while back I thought, I think it'd be nice to read some more stories, because I found the rest of the Millie Molly Mandy stories that I didn't have. I was able to get them out of the library and read them from my tablet or phone or something like that. So I had a complete set of the Millie Molly Mandy stories, which you can go and listen to over on YouTube if you want. And then from there, I decided, since I couldn't find any more books for that age group in the sort of books that I wanted to read, because most of them are a bit too preachy. It's sort of like, this is how to be a good little child type books, not really written for children, but really written to make adults feel good about children, hoping that the children are going to be well behaved. So after that, I thought, let's find some more books to read that are also old books, that will be some fun to read and to listen to, ones that I've read before or have heard before that maybe other people haven't heard at all. And I'm very aware of the fact that the books that I read are books that most people my age, or a little bit younger than me, have never ever heard or even heard of, unless it's as a movie or a TV series, such as The Secret Garden, which was one that's been done several times as a movie and as a TV series, I think. There are several versions of it, and I have yet to watch a few. I haven't watched them all, but I do want to watch them again sometime. And it's been great, actually, reading books that most people don't read. I found out that there's a lot of people do read books on YouTube, but most of them are teachers who are reading to their class, and then they save the stories there to YouTube so others can read them, listen to them. And most of them are picture books, or they're modern books. So I'm not quite sure how they work around the copyright rules for that, because the books that I read are public domain. And there may be some a bit later on, when I run out of other ones that I know that are old enough, that will be still within copyright, but they will be very old. And because I'm not monetized, I don't make money off this, it's less likely to be a problem. But they're also old books. And I'm about to start sorting books sometime in the next week, hopefully. And so I will have physical paper, books, books with pages that I can turn. You'll hear me turning the pages. Anyway, I'm going to carry on reading because I am going to read one more chapter today, which is going to take us well after 4 o'clock. So no more coffee for me today. Probably not a bad thing. And we shall see how we go. And I hope that the noise of the wind in my chimney, which is over there for me, isn't too much for you. I hope that my reading voice is loud enough. So we'll see how we go. The Wouldbegoods by E Nesbit, being the further adventures of the treasure seekers. And I am reading Chapter 6, The Circus. The ones of us who had started the Society of the Wouldbegoods began at about this time to bother. They said we had not done anything really noble, not worth speaking of, that is, for over a week, and that it was high time to begin again with earnest endeavour, as Daisy said. So then Oswald said, all right, but there ought to be an end to everything. Let us each of us think of one really noble and unselfish act, and the others shall help to work it out, like we did when we were treasure seekers. Then when everybody has had their go in, we'll write every single thing down in the Golden Deed book, and we'll draw 2 lines in red ink at the bottom, like Father does at the end of an account. And after that, if anyone wants to be good, they can jolly well be good on their own, if at all. Someone's had enough of trying, by the sound of it. Sorry, I've got an itchy eye. Yes, I did see the cat earlier on. The ones who had made the society did not welcome this wise idea, but Dickie and Oswald were firm. So they had to agree. When Oswald is really firm, opposingness and obstinacy have to give way. Dora said it would be a noble action to have all the school children from the village and give them tea and games in the paddock. They would think it so nice and good of us. But Dickie showed her that this would not be our good act, but Father's, because he would have to pay for the tea, and he had already stood us the keepsakes for the soldiers, as well as having to stump up heavily over the coal barge. And it is in vain being noble and generous when someone else is paying for it all the time, even if it happens to be your father. Then the 3 others had ideas at the same time and began to explain what they were. We were all in the dining room, and perhaps we were making a bit of a row. Anyhow, Oswald, for one, does not blame Albert's uncle for opening his door and saying, I suppose I must not ask for complete silence. That were too much. But if you could whistle or stamp with your feet or shriek or howl, anything to vary the monotony of your well-sustained conversation. Oswald said kindly, We're awfully sorry. Are you busy? Busy, said Albert's uncle. My heroine is now hesitating on the verge of an act which, for good or ill, must influence her whole subsequent career. You wouldn't like her to decide, in the middle of such a row, that she can't hear herself think. We said, No, we wouldn't. Then he said, If any outdoor amusement should commend itself to you this bright midsummer day. So we all went out. Then Daisy whispered to Dora, they always hang together. Daisy is not nearly so white-micey as she was at first, but she still seems to fear the deadly ordeal of public speaking. Dora said, Daisy's idea is a game that'll take us all day. She thinks keeping out of the way when he's making his heroine decide right, correctly, would be a noble act, and fit to write in the Golden Book, and we might as well be playing something at the same time. We all said yes, but what? There was a silent interval. Speak up, Daisy, my child, Oswald said. Fear not to lay bare the utmost thoughts of that faithful heart. Daisy giggled. Our own girls never giggle. They laugh right out or hold their tongues. Their kind brothers have taught them this. Then Daisy said, if we could have a sort of play to keep us out of the way. I once read a story about an animal race. Everybody had an animal, and they had to go how they liked, and the one that got in first got the prize. There was a tortoise in it, and a rabbit, and a peacock, and a sheep, and dogs, and a kitten. This proposal left us cold. As Albert's uncle says, because we knew there could not be any prize worth bothering about. And though you may be ever ready and willing to do anything for nothing, yet if there's going to be a prize, there must be a prize, and there's an end of it. Thus the idea was not followed up. Dickie yawned and said, "Let's go into the barn and make a fort." So we did, with straw. It does not hurt straw to be messed about with like it does hay. Straw is much tougher because it's hollow tubes instead of just being blades of grass. That's where drinking straws, the idea of drinking straws came from, I'm sure. The downstairs, down ladder, part of the barn was fun too, especially for Pincher. There was as good ratting there as you could wish to see. That means chasing after rats. Martha tried it, but she could not help running kindly beside the rat as if she was in double harness with it. This is the noble bulldog's gentle and affectionate nature coming out. We all enjoyed the ratting that day, but it ended as usual in the girls crying because of the poor rats. Girls cannot help this. We must not be waxy with them on account of it. They have their nature the same as bulldogs have, and it is this that makes them so useful in smoothing the pillows of the sick bed and tending wounded heroes. I think they're a little bit different now, girls. However, in the forts and Pincher and the girls crying and having to be thumped on the back passed the time very agreeably till dinner. There was roast mutton with onion sauce and a roly-poly pudding. Albert's uncle said we had certainly effaced ourselves effectually, which means we hadn't bothered. So we determined to do the same during the afternoon, for he told us his heroine was by no means out of the woods yet. And at first it was easy. Jam Rolly gives you a peaceful feeling, and you do not at first care if you never play any runabout game ever any more, but after a while the torpor begins to pass away. Oswald was the first to recover from this. He had been lying on his front part in the orchard, but now he turned over on his back and kicked his legs up and said, "I say, look here, let's do something." Daisy looked thoughtful. She was chewing the soft yellow parts of grass, but I could see she was still thinking about that animal race. So I explained to her that it would be very poor fun without a tortoise and a peacock, and she saw this, though not willingly. It was H.O. who said, "Doing anything with animals is prime if they only will. Let's have a circus." At the word, the last thought of the pudding faded from Oswald's memory, and he stretched himself, sat up and said, "Bully for H.O., let's." The others also threw off the heavy weight of memory and sat up and said, "Let's," too. Never, never in all our lives had we had such a gay galaxy of animals at our command. The rabbits and the guinea pigs, and even all the bright glass-eyed stuffed denizens of our late-lamented jungle, paled into insignificance before the number of live things on the farm. I hope you do not think that the words I use are getting too long. I know they are the right words, and Albert's uncle says your style is always altered a bit by what you read, and I have been reading the Vicomte de Bragelonne. Nearly all my new words come out of those. The worst of a circus is, Dora said, that you've got to teach the animals things. A circus where the performing creatures hadn't learned performing would be a bit silly. Let's give up a week of teaching them and then have the circus. Give up a week to teaching them and then have the circus. Some people have no idea of the value of time, and Dora is one of those who do not understand that when you want to do a thing, you do want to, and not to do something else, and perhaps your own thing, a week later. Oswald said the first thing was to collect the performing animals. Then perhaps, he said, we may find that they have hidden talents hitherto unsuspected by their harsh masters. So Denny took a pencil and wrote a list of the animals required. This is it. List of animals requisite for the circus we are going to have. No, requisite. List of animals requisite for the circus we are going to have. 1 bull for bullfighting. 1 horse for ditto, if possible. 1 goat to do alpine feats of daring. one donkey to play seesaw, 2 white pigs to be learned and the other to play pigs, one to be learned and the other to play the clown. Turkeys, as many as possible, because they can make a noise that sounds like an audience applauding. The dogs for any odd parts, 1 large black pig to be the elephant in the procession, calves, several, to be camels and to stand on tubs. Daisy ought to have been captain because it was partly her idea, but she let Oswald be because she is of a retiring character. Oswald said, "The first thing is to get all the creatures together. The paddock at the side of the orchard is the very place, because the hedge is good all round. When we've got the performers all there, we'll make a programme and then dress for our parts. It's a pity there won't be any audience but the turkeys." We took the animals in their right order according to Denny's list. The bull was the first. He's black. He does not live in the cowhouse with the other horned people. He has a house all to himself, 2 fields away. Oswald and Alice went to fetch him. They took a halter to lead the bull by, and a whip, not to hurt the bull with, but just to make him mind. The others were to try to get one of the horses while we were gone. Oswald, as usual, was full of bright ideas. "I dare say," he said, "the bull will be shy at first, and he will have to be goaded into the arena." "But goads hurt," said Alice. "They don't hurt the bull," Oswald said. "His powerful hide is too thick." "Then why does he attend to it?" Alice asked, "if it doesn't hurt?" "Properly brought up bulls attend because they know they ought," Oswald said. "I think I shall ride the bull," the brave boy went on. "A bullfight where an intrepid rider appears on the bull, sharing its joys and sorrows. It would be something quite new." "You can't ride bulls," Alice said. "At least not if their backs are sharp like cows." That sounds like someone's tried riding a cow. But Oswald thought he could. The bull lives in a house made of wood and prickly furze bushes, and he has a yard to his house. You cannot climb on the roof of his house at all comfortably. When we got there, he was half in his house and half out in his yard, and he was swinging his tail because of the flies which bothered. It was a very hot day. "You'll see," Alice said. "He won't want a goad. He'll be so glad to get out for a walk he'll drop his head in my hand like a tame fawn and follow me lovingly all the way." Oswald called to him. He said, "Bull, bull, bull, bull," because we did not know the animal's real name. The bull took no notice. Then Oswald picked up a stone and threw it at the bull, not angrily, but just to make it pay attention. But the bull did not pay a farthing's worth of it. So then Oswald leaned over the iron gate of the bull's yard and just flicked the bull with the whiplash, and then the bull did pay attention. He started when the lash struck him. Then suddenly he faced round, uttering a roar like that of the wounded king of the beasts, and putting his head down close to his feet, he ran straight at the iron gate where we were standing. Alice and Oswald mechanically turned away. They did not wish to annoy the bull any more, and they ran as fast as they could across the field so as not to keep the others waiting. Yeah, right. As they ran across the field, Oswald had a dream-like fancy that perhaps the bull had rooted up the gate with one paralysing blow and was now tearing across the field after him, and Alice with the broken gate balanced on its horns. We climbed the stile quickly and looked back. The bull was still on the right side of the gate. Oswald said, "I think we'll do without the bull." He did not seem to want to come. We must be kind to dumb animals. Alice said between laughing and crying, "Oh, Oswald, how can you?" But we did do without the bull, and we did not tell the others how we had hurried to get back. We just said the bull didn't seem to care about coming. The others had not been idle. They had got out Clover, the cart horse, but she would do nothing but graze, so we decided not to use her in the bullfight, but to let her be the elephant. The elephants is quite a nice part, and she was quite big enough for a young one. Then the black pig could be learned, and the other 2 could be something else. They had also got the goat. He was tethered to a young tree. The donkey was there. Denny was leading him in the halter. The dogs were there, of course. They always are. So now we only had to get the turkeys for the applause and the calves and pigs. The calves were easy to get because they were in their own house. There were 5, and the pigs were in their houses too. We got them out after long patient toil and persuaded them that they wanted to go into the paddock where the circus was to be. This was done by pretending to drive them the other way. A pig only knows 2 ways, the way you want him to go and the other. But the turkeys knew thousands of different ways and tried them all. They made such an awful row we had to drop all ideas of ever hearing applause from their lips, so we came away and left them. Never mind, said H.O. They'll be sorry enough afterwards, nasty, unobliging things, because now they won't see the circus. I hope the other animals will tell them all about it. While the turkeys were engaging in baffling the rest of us, Dickie had found 3 sheep who seemed to wish to join the glad throng, so we let them. Then we shut the gate of the paddock and left the dumb circus performers to make friends with each other while we dressed. Oswald and H.O. were to be clowns. It's quite easy with Albert's uncle's pyjamas and flour on your hair and face and the red they do the brick floors with. Alice had very short pink and white skirts and roses in her hair and round her dress. Her dress was the pink calico and white muslin stuff off the dressing table in the girls' room, fastened with pins and tied round the waist with a small bath towel. She was to be the dauntless equestrienne, and to give her enhancing act a barebacked daring, riding either a pig or a sheep. Whichever we found was freshest and most skittish. I don't know if you know farm animals at all, but this is building up to something. Dora was dressed for the haute école, which means a riding habit and a high hat. She took Dick's topper, that's his top hat, that he wears with his Etons, probably for school, and a skirt of Mrs. Pettigrew's. Daisy, dressed the same as Alice, taking the muslin from Mrs. Pettigrew's dressing table without saying anything beforehand. None of us would have advised this, and indeed we were thinking of trying to put it back when Denny and Noel, who were wishing to look like highwaymen with brown paper top boots and slouch hats and Turkish towel cloaks, suddenly stopped dressing and gazed out of the window. "Crikey," said Dick. "Come on, Oswald," and he bounded like an antelope from the room. Oswald and the rest followed, casting a hasty glance through the window. Noel had got brown paper boots too and a Turkish towel cloak. H.O. had been waiting for Dora to dress him up for the other clown. He had only his shirt and knickerbockers and his braces on. He came down as he was, as indeed we all did, and no wonder, for in the paddock, where the circus was to be, a blood-thrilling thing had transpired. The dogs were chasing the sheep, and we had now lived long enough in the country to know the fell nature of our dogs' improper conduct. Oh dear, not a good thing for dogs to be chasing animals in the country. We all rushed into the paddock, calling to Pincher and Martha and Lady. Pincher came almost at once. He is a well-brought-up dog. Oswald trained him. Martha did not seem to hear. She is awfully deaf, but she did not matter so much, because the sheep could walk away from her easily. She has no pace and no wind, that's the stamina. But Lady is a deer-hound. She is used to pursuing that fleet and antlered pride of the forest, the stag, and she can go like Billy-O. She was now far away in a distant region of the paddock, with a fat sheep just before her in full flight. I am sure if anybody's eyes did start out of their heads with horror, like in narratives of adventure, ours did then. There was a moment's pause of speechless horror. We expected to see Lady pull down her quarry, and we know what a lot of money a sheep costs, to say nothing of its own personal feelings. Then we started to run for all we were worth. It is hard to run swiftly as an arrow from the bow when you happen to be wearing pyjamas belonging to a grown-up person, as I was. But even so I beat Dickie. He said afterwards it was because his brown paper boots came undone and tripped him up. Alice came in third. She held on the dressing table muslin and ran jolly well. But ere we reached the fatal spot, all was very nearly up with the sheep. We heard a plop. Lady stopped and looked round. She must have heard us bellowing to her as we ran. Then she came towards us, prancing with happiness, but we said down and bad dog and ran sternly on. When we came to the brook which forms the northern boundary of the paddock, we saw the sheep struggling in the water. It is not very deep, and I believe the sheep could have stood up and been well in its depth if it had liked, but it would not try. It was a steepish bank. Alice and I got down and stuck our legs into the water, and then Dicky came down, and the three of us hauled that sheep up by its shoulders till it could rest on Alice and me as we sat on the bank. It kicked all the time we were hauling. It gave one extra kick at last that raised it up, and I tell you that sopping wet, heavy, panting, silly donkey of a sheep sat there on our laps like a pet dog, and Dicky got his shoulder under it at the back and heaved constantly to keep it from flumping off into the water again, while the others fetched the shepherd. When the shepherd came, he called us every name you can think of, and then he said, "Good thing master didn't come along. He would have called you some tidy names." He got the sheep out and took it and the others away, and the calves too. He did not seem to care about the other performing animals. Alice, Oswald and Dick had almost enough circus for just then. So we sat in the sun and dried ourselves and wrote the program of the circus. This was it. Program 1. Startling leap from the lofty precipice by the performing sheep. Real water and real precipice. The gallant rescue. O.A. and D. Bastable. We thought we might as well put that in, though it was over and had happened accidentally. 2. Graceful barebacked equestrian act on the trained pig. Eliza A. Bastable. On the trained pig, Eliza A. Bastable. That's who's doing it. 3. Amusing clown interlude introducing trained dog Pincher and the other white pig. H.O. and O. Bastable. 4. The seesaw. Trained donkeys. H.O. said we only had one donkey, so Dicky and H.O. could be the other. When peace was restored, we went on to 5. It sounds like they argued about it. Elegant equestrian act by D. Bastable. Haute école on Clover, the incomparative trained elephant from the plains of Venezuela. Why an elephant would come from there, I don't know. 6. Alpine feat of daring. The climbing of the Andes by Billy, the well-known acrobatic goat. We thought we could make the Andes out of hurdles and things. And so we could have, but for what always happens. This is the unexpected. This is a saying Father told me, but I see I am 3 deep in brackets, so I will close them before I get into any more. End of all those brackets. Number 7. The black but learned pig. I dare say he knows something, Alice said, if we can only find out what. We did find out. All too soon. We could not think of anything else, and our things were nearly dry, all except Dick's brown paper top boots, which were mingled with the gurgling waters of the brook. We went back to the seat of action, which was the iron trough where the sheep have their salts put, and began to dress up the creatures. We had just tied the Union Jack we made out of Daisy's flannel petticoat, etc., when we gave the soldiers the baccy round the waist of the black and learned pig, when we heard screams from the back part of the house, and suddenly we saw that Billy, the acrobatic goat, had got loose from the tree we had tied him to. He had eaten all the parts of its bark that he could get at, but we did not notice it until next day when led to the spot by a grown-up. The gate of the paddock was open. The gate leading to the bridge that goes over the moat to the back door was open too. We hastily proceeded in the direction of the screams, and guided by the sound, threaded our way into the kitchen. As we went, Noel, ever fertile in melancholy ideas, said he wondered whether Mrs. Pettigrew was being robbed or only murdered. In the kitchen we saw that Noel was wrong as usual. It was neither. Mrs. Pettigrew, screaming like a steam siren and waving a broom, occupied the foreground. In the distance the maid was shrieking in a hoarse and monotonous way and trying to shut herself up inside a clothes horse on which washing was being aired. On the dresser, which he had ascended by a chair, was Billy, the acrobatic goat, doing his alpine daring act. He had found out his Andes for himself, and even as we gazed he turned and tossed his head in a way that showed us some mysterious purpose was hidden beneath his calm exterior. The next moment he put his off horn neatly behind the end plate of the next to the bottom row and ran it along against the wall. The plates fell crashing onto the soup tureen and vegetable dishes which adorned the lower range of the Andes. Mrs. Pettigrew's screams were almost drowned in the discarded crash and crackle of the falling avalanche of crockery. Oswald, though stricken with horror and polite regret, preserved the most dauntless coolness, disregarding the mop with which Mrs. Pettigrew kept on poking at the goat. In a timid yet cross way, he sprang forward, crying out to his trusty followers, "Stand by to catch him!" But Dick had thought of the same thing, and ere Oswald could carry out his long-cherished and general-like design, Dickie had caught the goat's legs and tripped it up. The goat fell against another row of plates, righted itself hastily in the gloomy ruins of the soup tureen and the sauce boats, and then fell again, this time towards Dickie. The two fell heavily on the ground together. The trusty followers had been so struck by the daring of Dickie and his lion-hearted brother that they had not stood by to catch anything. The goat was not hurt, but Dickie had a sprained thumb and a lump on his head, like a black marble doorknob. He had to go to bed. I will draw a veil over and asterisks over what Mrs. Pettigrew said. Also Albert's uncle, who was brought to the scene of ruin by her screams. Few words escaped our lips. There are times when it is not wise to argue, however little what has occurred is really our fault. When they said what they deemed enough, and we were let go, we all went out. Then Alice said distractedly in a voice which she vainly strove to render firm, "Let us give up the circus. Let's put the toys back in the boxes. No, I don't mean that. The creatures in their places, and drop the whole thing. I want to go and read to Dickie." Oswald has a spirit that no reserves can depreciate. Sorry, the word's split on 2 lines. A spirit that no reserves can depreciate. He hates to be beaten. But he gave in to Alice, as the others said so too, and we went out to collect the performing troupe and sort it out into its proper places. Alas, we came too late. In the interest we had felt about whether Mrs. Pettigrew was the abject victim of burglars or not, we had left both gates open again. The old horse, I mean the trained elephant from Venezuela, was there all right. The dogs we had beaten and tied up after the first act, when the intrepid sheep bounded, as it says in the programme. The dogs we had beaten and tied up after the first act, when the intrepid sheep bounded, as it says in the programme. The 2 white pigs were there, but the donkey was gone. We heard his hooves down the road growing fainter and fainter in the direction of the Rose and Crown. And just round the gate-post we saw a flash of red and white and blue and black that told us with dumb signification that the pig was off in exactly the opposite direction. Why couldn't they have gone the same way? But no, one was a pig and the other was a donkey, as Denny said afterwards. Daisy and H.O. stared after the donkey. The rest of us, with one accord, pursued the pig. I don't know why. It trotted quietly down the road. It looked very black against the white road, and the ends of the top where the Union Jack was tied bobbed brightly as it trotted. At first we thought it would be easy to catch up to it. This was an error. When we ran faster, it ran faster. When we stopped, it stopped, and looked round at us, and nodded. I dare say you won't swallow this, but you may safely. It's as true as true, and so's all that about the goat. I give you my sacred word of honour. I tell you, the pig nodded, as much as to say, oh yes, I think you will. You think you will, but you won't. And then as soon as we moved off again, off it went. The pig led us on and on, miles and miles of strange country. One thing, it did keep to the roads. When we met people, which wasn't often, we called out to them to help us, but they only waved their arms and roared with laughter. One chap on a bicycle almost tumbled off his machine, and then he got off it and propped it against a gate and sat down in the hedge to laugh. You remember Alice was still dressed up as the gay equestrienne and the dressing table pink and white with rosy garlands, and now very droopy, and she had no stockings on. Oh, the garlands were now very droopy, and she had no stockings on, only white sand shoes, because she thought they would be easier than boots for balancing on the pig in the graceful barebacked act. Oswald was attired in red paint and flour and pyjamas for a clown. It is really impossible to run speedfully in another man's pyjamas, so Oswald had taken them off and wore his own brown knickerbockers belonging to his Norfolks. It's obviously an outfit of some sort. He had tied the pyjamas round his neck to carry them easily. He was afraid to leave them in a ditch, as Alice suggested, because he did not know the roads, and for aught he recked, they might have been infested with footpads. That's for all he reckoned. If it had been his own pyjamas, it would have been different. I'm going to ask for pyjamas next winter. They are so useful in so many ways. Noel was a highwayman in brown paper gaiters and bath towels and a cocked hat of newspaper. I don't know how he kept it on. And the pig was encircled by the dauntless banner of our country. All the same, I think if I had seen a band of youthful travellers in bitter distress about a pig, I should have tried to lend a helping hand and not sat roaring in the hedge, no matter how the travellers and the pig might have been dressed. It was hotter than anyone would believe who has never had occasion to hunt the pig when dressed for quite another part. The flour got out of Oswald's hair into his eyes and mouth. His brow was wet with what the village blacksmith's was wet with, and not his fair brow alone. Oh, in this day and age you didn't say the word sweat. It was rude, very rude. It ran down his face and washed the red off in streaks, and when he rubbed his eyes he only made it worse. Alice had to run holding the equestrian skirts on with both hands, and I think the brown paper boots bothered Noel from the first. Dora had her skirt over her arm and carried the topper in her hand. That's the top hat. It was no use to tell ourselves it was a wild boar hunt. We were long past that. At last we met a man who took pity on us. He was a kind-hearted man. I think perhaps he had a pig of his own, or perhaps children. Honour to his name. He stood in the middle of the road and waved his arms. The pig right wheeled through a gate into a private garden and cantered up the drive. We followed. What else were we to do? I should like to know. The learned black pig seemed to know its way. It turned first to the right and then to the left and emerged on a lawn. Now, all together, cried Oswald, mustering his failing voice to give the word of command. Surround him, cut off his retreat. We almost surrounded him. He edged off towards the house. Now we've got him, cried the crafty Oswald as the pig got out onto a bed of yellow pansies close against the red house wall. All would even then have been well, but Denny at last shrank from meeting the pig face to face in a manly way. He let the pig pass him, and the next moment, with a squeak that said, "There now," as plain as words, the pig bolted into a French window. The pursuers halted not. This was not a time for trivial ceremony. In another moment the pig was a captive. Alice and Oswald had their arms round him under the ruins of a table that had had teacups on it, and around the hunters and their prey stood the startled members of a parish society for making clothes for the poor heathen that the pig had led us into the very midst of. They were reading a missionary report or something when we ran our quarry to earth under their table. Even as he crossed the threshold, I heard something about black brothers being already white to the harvest. All the ladies had been sewing flannel things for the poor blacks while the curate read aloud to them. You think they screamed when they saw the pig and us? You are right. On the whole, I cannot say that the missionary people behaved badly. Oswald explained that it was entirely the pig's doing, and asked pardon quite properly for any alarm the ladies had felt. And Alice said how sorry we were, but really it was not our fault this time. The curate looked a bit nasty, but the presence of ladies made him keep his hot blood to himself. When we had explained, we said, might we go? The curate said, the sooner the better. But the lady of the house asked for our names and addresses and said she would write to our father. She did, and we heard of it too. They did not do anything to us, as Oswald at one time believed to be the curate's idea. They let us go, and we went, after we had asked for a piece of rope to lead the pig by. In case it should come back into your nice room, Alice said, and that would be such a pity, wouldn't it? A little girl in a starched pinafore was sent for the rope, and as soon as the pig had agreed to let us tie it round his neck, we came away. The scene in the drawing-room had not been long. The pig went slowly, like a meandering brook, Denny said. Just by the gate the shrubs rustled and opened, and the little girl came out. Her pinafore was full of cake. Here, she said, you must be hungry if you've come all that way. I think they might have given you some tea after all the trouble you've had. We took the cake with correct thanks. I wish I could play at circuses, she said. Tell me all about it. We told her while we ate the cake, and when we had done, she said perhaps it was better to hear about than do, especially the goat's part, and Dicky's. But I do wish Auntie had given you tea, she said. We told her not to be too hard on her aunt, because you have to make allowances for grown-up people. When we parted, she said she would never forget us, and Oswald gave her his pocket button-hook and corkscrew combined, for a keepsake. Dicky's act with the goat, which is true and no kid, was the only thing out of the day that was put in the Golden Deed book, and he put that in himself while we were out hunting the pig. Alice and me capturing the pig was never put in. We would scorn to write our own good actions, but I suppose Dicky was dull with us all away, and you must pity the dull and not blame them. I will not seek to unfold to you how we got the pig home, or how the donkey was caught. That was poor sport compared to the pig. Nor will I tell you a word of all that was said and done to the intrepid hunters of the black and learned. I have told you all the interesting part. Seek not to know the rest. It is better buried in obliquity. And that's the end of that chapter in today's reading. I think they really need to stop trying to be good, and then they might not get into quite so much trouble. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed our story today with all the various nonsenses happening. It's one of those wonderful stories where you can see what's going to happen. You can anticipate it, but the fun is in hearing it and the descriptions involved. Anyway, so I'm going to finish now, and you can carry on with whatever it was that you were doing before. Bye!